I woke up to a deep bass thumping in the distance, a rhythmic pounding that shook the glass on my nightstand so hard I thought it might shatter. At first, I figured it was a dream, maybe thunder rolling through or my neighbor's teenage son testing his latest speakers. But when I yanked back the curtain, my jaw nearly hit the floor. My peaceful pasture, the wide-open land my family had owned for generations, had transformed overnight into a full-blown music festival. Hundreds of people milled about, laughing, drinking, and dancing, their voices blending with the deafening beat blasting from massive speakers now parked where my horse stables used to stand alone. A neon-colored stage glowed in the field's center, sending vibrations I could feel in my chest even from inside my house. Food trucks lined my fence, vendors hawked overpriced festival gear, and squinting through the chaos, I swore I saw a mechanical bull. My brain stalled, refusing to process the absurdity, but my body moved on instinct. I threw on a jacket, stormed outside, boots crunching against dry dirt, and marched toward the madness. My horses were pressed against the far end of the pasture, eyes wide with panic, as a couple of guys hammered metal stakes into the ground, stringing up banners reading Karen's Freedom Fest. Who the hell was Karen? I was about to find out. Weaving through the crowd, I spotted her near a makeshift ticket booth, tall, blonde, decked out in oversized sunglasses and a designer jumpsuit that screamed privilege. She barked orders at staff in matching t-shirts, barely noticing me as I stormed up and demanded, "What the hell is going on here?" Karen flicked her eyes my way, sizing me up like I was a nuisance, then turned back to instruct someone about VIP wristbands. When she finally deigned to face me, her voice dripped with condescension. "Can I help you?" I snapped. "Yeah, you can explain why you're throwing a festival on my land." She laughed. A short, amused sound peeled off her sunglasses and said, "Your land? No, sweetie, this is public land. We got permission from the community board." Dumbfounded, I stared at her. "No, you didn't. I own this land. My family has for generations." She sighed, dramatic and patronizing, like I was a toddler throwing a fit. "Listen, I don't know what to tell you. We've sold thousands of tickets. People are coming from all over. You should thank me your little pasture." Getting serious exposure. My eye twitched. Exposure. I didn't need exposure. I needed her gone. Her fake patience morphed into irritation as she crossed her arms. "Look, I don't have time for this. Take it up with the city. We're not leaving." I took a deep breath, resisting the urge to scream, and said, "I'm calling the police." Karen smirked, unfazed. "Go ahead, I'll tell them you're harassing a legally organized event. Let's see how that plays out." Clenching my jaw, I stepped away, dialing the dispatcher as the music blared behind me. "Sir, we're backed up tonight," they said. "Unless it's an immediate threat, we can't send anyone right away." I hung up, fingers tightening around the phone. Karen had planned this, knew no one could stop her in time. Watching more people flood my field, trampling it with beer cans and plastic cups, I realized she'd played her hand well. But as I saw a guy set up a sign, "Mechanical bull rides, $20 a turn," I decided if she wanted to play dirty, I'd play dirtier. I turned away from Karen, my mind already spinning with a plan to dismantle her chaotic empire piece by piece. She might have thought she'd won with her smug grin and fake permits, but I wasn't about to let her destroy my land without a fight. First, I dialed the health department, keeping my voice steady as I explained the unregulated festival. Food stalls and alcohol vendors popping up without permits, a recipe for sanitation disasters or worse, food poisoning outbreaks. I painted a vivid picture of overflowing trash, questionable hygiene, and a crowd too drunk to care, and the person on the line took it seriously, promising to send someone ASAP. Next, I called animal control, having spotted a guy with a giant python draped over his shoulders like a scarf, a woman totting a baby alligator in a tank, and an influencer with a parrot screeching over the music. I reported exotic pets loose without permits, potential safety hazards in a packed crowd, and the dispatcher perked up, especially at the mention of the alligator, saying, "We'll be right there." Feeling the momentum build, I rang the fire department, pointing out the tangle of wires snaking from generators to speakers, the flammable setups in dry grass, and the sheer volume of alcohol fueling this mess. When I added that someone was rigging fireworks, their response was immediate. "We're dispatching a team now." But the final blow, my ace in the hole, was the IRS. Karen had bragged on a live stream about raking in tens of thousands from ticket sales, vendor fees, and VIP perks, all unreported, untaxed, and illegal on my property. I gave the agent her name, the event's title, and every detail I could muster, and they promised to investigate. As I slipped back into the festival's chaos, blending into the sea of jumping bodies and flashing lights, the bass shook the ground harder than ever. The crowd had swelled, influencers live-streaming their epic night, oblivious to the storm brewing. Then it hit. The health department's white van rolled up, and 3 inspectors stepped out, badges gleaming, clipboards in hand. They zeroed in on the food trucks, demanding permits and shutting down stalls within minutes, confiscating trays of tacos and kegs of beer as vendors scrambled to explain. Karen noticed instantly, stomping over with flailing arms, her voice shrill as she insisted it was a private event, and everything's handled. The inspectors didn't budge, scribbling notes when she couldn't produce a single document. While she was distracted, animal control pulled up, officers fanning out toward the python guy, the gator girl, and the parrot influencer. They confiscated the animals with swift precision. Python guy claiming his snake was emotional support got shut down cold, and the gator girl sobbed as her pet was hauled away. The festival's edges started fraying. Attendees whispered nervously, sensing the vibe shift. Then the fire department arrived, 4 firefighters stepping from their truck, shaking their heads at the mess of wires and generators. They began unplugging equipment, citing fire hazards, ignoring pleas about ruining the festival. When they spotted the fireworks setup, one radioed for backup, and I knew Karen's house of cards was crumbling. She didn't see it yet, still arguing with the health inspectors, but I could. Her Freedom Fest was about to crash hard. I stood back, watching the dominoes fall, my plan unfolding smoother than I dared hope. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was a damn good start. The festival was unraveling faster than Karen could scream, and I stood back, watching the chaos I'd unleashed swallow her whole. The firefighters were still shutting down generators, their radios crackling with urgency as they tackled the fireworks setup, while animal control loaded the last of the exotic pets into their van, the parrot's screeches fatting into the night. Health inspectors continued their relentless sweep, sealing coolers and tapping closed signs on food stalls, leaving vendors red-faced and cursing. The crowd, once buzzing with excitement, now murmured with unease, some drifting toward the exits, others filming the downfall like it was a live-action drama. Karen, caught in the eye of the storm, flailed between the inspectors and her staff, her voice a mix of fury and desperation, but no one was listening. Then she made her fatal mistake. Grabbing her phone, she called the police herself, thinking she could spin this in her favor. I watched from a distance as she waved her free hand, yelling into the receiver, her blonde hair whipping in the wind. Within minutes, 2 cruisers rolled up, lights flashing, cutting through the thinning crowd. Karen's smirk returned, triumphant, as she marched toward them, pointing at me like I was the villain. "That man!" she shrieked, her voice piercing the air. "He's harassing my event, trespassing, trying to shut us down. I have a legal permit. He's ruining everything." The officers glanced my way, and I stayed calm, hands in my pockets, waiting. A stocky man in his 40s with a thick mustache approached me. "Sir, what's going on here?" he asked, his tone neutral. I gestured around. "This is my land. I never gave permission for any of this." Before I could elaborate, Karen barreled in, "That's not true." "I have a lease agreement. He's just bitter and sabotaging us." The officer frowned. "Do you have the agreement with you?" She nodded eagerly, scrolling through her phone and thrusting it at him. I couldn't see the screen, but I caught his expression shift, confusion, then suspicion. He handed it to his partner, a woman with short brown hair who typed something into her own device. After a tense minute, she looked up. "Ma'am, this document is fake." Karen blinked, stunned. "Excuse me." The officer held up her phone. "It's photoshopped. The document number's nonsense, and the landowner listed doesn't exist." The color drained from Karen's face, her sunglasses slipping as she fumbled for words. I crossed my arms, watching her empire crack. She just tried to fraudulently claim my land in front of cops. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. It was attempted fraud. The mustache officer sighed. "Sir, do you have proof of ownership?" I pulled out my phone, opened my land deed, and handed it over. He scanned it, nodded, and returned it. "That's all we need." Karen snapped. "You can't just believe him over me." The woman officer shot back. "Ma'am, you lied to us, organized an illegal event, and caused multiple safety violations. I'd stop talking if I were you." Karen's jaw tightened, her confidence shattering like glass. The cops didn't cuff her yet, but they made her step aside, muttering into their radios. The festival was dead, the music silent, the crowd thinning fast. Karen's staff slunk away, abandoning her as the reality sank in. She, outplayed herself, and I hadn't even broken a sweat. This was her endgame, and I was just getting started. Corinne's world was collapsing, and the panic in her eyes was almost tangible as the police radios buzzed with updates. The festival, once a throbbing mass of noise and color, had dissolved into a disjointed mess. Vendors packing up under the stern gaze of health inspectors, animal control hauling off the last of the confiscated pets, and firefighters stomping out any chance of a spark. Attendees whispered and filmed, some slipping away into the night, grumbling about wasted tickets, while a few diehard influencers lingered, milking the drama for clout with "This is so unfair" videos. Corinne's staff, the ones in those matching t-shirts, had vanished, leaving her alone to face the fallout. She tried to rally, throwing out empty threats. "This is harassment. I have a lawyer." But her voice cracked, and even she didn't buy it anymore. The woman officer stood firm, motioning her to stay put as they dug deeper into her lies. Then the real hammer dropped. Two plainclothes figures stepped out of an unmarked car, flashing badges to the cops before scanning the crowd. I knew them instantly, IRS agents. My final call had landed, and they were here for Corinne's financial reckoning. They approached her with calm precision, one clutching a notepad, the other a tablet, and introduced themselves. "We need to discuss the festival's finances, ticket sales, vendor fees, sponsorships," one said, voice flat but cutting. Corinne blinked, feigning confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but they weren't fazed. They had evidence, screenshots from the event's website, payment links, and a damning livestream clip where she'd boasted about making bank without permits. They played it back, her own laughter echoing as her face went pale. She glanced around, searching for an escape, but the crowd had turned into a live audience for her downfall, phones out, capturing every second. Her influencer pals were long gone, distancing themselves from the wreckage. Then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife, a new disaster struck. Shouts erupted near the Pasture's edge. Some idiot had ignored the firefighters earlier and set off fireworks, one landing in dry grass near a food stall. A small brush fire flared up, orange tongues licking the night air. The crowd scattered, and Corinne let out a strangled scream, her hands flying to her head. The firefighters, already on scene, sprang into action, dousing the flames in minutes, but the damage was done. The cops now had a fire hazard to add to the pile, trespassing, fraud, and public safety violations stacking up like bricks on Corinne's chest. The lead officer turned to her, voice stern. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us." That's when she snapped. "This isn't fair," she shrieked, spinning toward me, eyes wild. "You did this, you called them, you ruined everything." I didn't flinch. One of the cops stepped between us, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, that's enough." She tried to shake him off, but it was futile. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists, and a murmur rippled through the onlookers. Some gasped, others filmed, immortalizing her defeat. Corinne kept ranting, blaming everyone but herself, but it didn't matter. They led her to the cruiser, her designer jumpsuit clashing with the flashing lights. I caught the eye of a defeated staffer nearby. He knew it was over too. My Pasture was a wreck, but in that moment I felt nothing but triumph. As Corinne was escorted to the police cruiser, her voice still echoing with frantic accusations, the festival's remains lay scattered across my Pasture like a battlefield after a rout. The handcuffs glinted under the flashing lights, a final punctuation to her unraveling, and the crowd's murmurs grew into a low roar of shock and fascination. Phones held high, capturing every second of her exit. Her once loyal staffer, the one I'd locked eyes with, slunk off into the shadows, probably calculating how to salvage his cut of the profits. But it was clear there'd be nothing left to claim. The emergency responders moved with practiced efficiency. Firefighters packed up their gear, satisfied the brush fire was dead. Animal control slammed their van doors shut, the python and alligator secured. Health inspectors issued final warnings to the last vendors, who were tossing spoiled food into trash bags. The music was long gone, replaced by the hum of departing engines and the crunch of boots on trampled grass. I surveyed the wreckage, broken fences leaning like drunkards, plastic cups and beer cans littering the ground, abandoned decorations flapping in the breeze. It'd take weeks to fix, maybe longer, but right then I didn't care. Corinne was gone, her freedom fest reduced to a cautionary tale, and I'd come out on top without raising my voice. The cops lingered, wrapping up their reports, one jotting notes while the woman officer spoke quietly with the IRS agents. Those two were still dissecting Corinne's financial web, ticket sales, vendor cuts, the unreported cash she'd bragged about. and I could tell they weren't leaving until they had every thread. A few festival stragglers hung around, filming or snapping selfies with the chaos as a backdrop, but most had bylayed, muttering about wasted money and ruined nights. I took a deep breath, the cool air sharp against the adrenaline still buzzing in my veins. This wasn't the quiet evening I'd planned, far from it, but justice had a way of making the mess worthwhile. A few days later, the story exploded online. Social media lit up with videos of Karen's meltdown, her wild eyes and shrieks as the cuffs went on, the authorities dismantling her dream piece by piece. Clips of the shutdown went viral, paired with endless commentary. Some dubbed it the biggest influencer scam of the year. Others turned her tantrum into memes that spread like wildfire. Her brand, built on arrogance and flash, crumbled overnight. Sponsors dropped her faster than a hot coal, her so-called friends vanished, and the IRS dug deeper, uncovering a trail of unpaid taxes that stretched back years. She wasn't just facing a night in jail anymore. Legal trouble loomed like a storm cloud she couldn't outrun. Meanwhile, I got a call that flipped the script entirely. A documentary crew wanted to cover the fiasco, pitching it as a case study on influencer entitlement gone wrong. I agreed, but only if I got a cut of the profits, and they jumped at it. My Pasture, once hijacked by Karen's madness, was about to star in a new kind of show, one where I'd have the last laugh. The night had started with me fuming, watching my land get overrun, but by the end, I'd turned her game against her. Karma had a funny way of rewarding patience, and as I stood there, the quiet settling back over my trampled field, I knew I'd walked away the victor. The dust hadn't even settled on my ravaged pasture when the fallout from Karen's fiasco began to ripple beyond the night itself, turning my quiet corner of the world into a bizarre kind of legend. The cleanup loomed ahead, fences to mend, trash to haul, and my poor horses to calm after their ordeal. But the satisfaction of watching her empire implode kept me steady. Social media didn't let it die. Every scroll brought fresh takes. Hashtags like Karen's Freedom Flop trending alongside shaky footage of her handcuffed rant, her designer jumpsuit now a punchline. Commenters tore her apart. "Entitled much," one wrote, while another posted a gif of her shriek with "When your scam gets scammed" captioned below. Her influencer clique, the ones who'd posed with wristbands and hyped the event, went radio silent or posted vague apologies, claiming they'd been misled. Sponsors bolted, issuing statements about values misalignment, and her online store, once peddling overpriced merch, went dark, leaving a trail of angry customers demanding refunds. The IRS wasn't playing either. Reports trickled out that they'd seized her accounts, finding not just the festival cash, but a history of dodged taxes that painted her as a serial grifter. Legal filings piled up, fraud, trespassing, safety violations, and rumors swirled she'd hired a lawyer who was already backpedaling from her mess. Meanwhile, I fielded calls from neighbors who'd seen the lights and heard the chaos, piecing together my tale of revenge with wide-eyed grins. The documentary crew showed up a week later, cameras rolling as they interviewed me against the backdrop of my battered field, now a symbol of defiance. They loved the angle, small-town landowner versus influencer greed, and I made sure my cut was locked in, turning Karen's disaster into my payday. Insurance adjusters came too, cataloging the damage. The broken fences and trampled grass would cost a chunk, but the payout would cover it, and then some. My horses, still skittish, got extra feed and quiet days to recover, their wide eyes softening as the pasture returned to peace. The crew asked about Karen, digging for dirt, but I kept it simple. She'd picked the wrong guy to mess with. Online, the story morphed. Some called me a hero, others a petty mastermind, but I didn't care for the labels. What mattered was the quiet creeping back, the land healing under my boots. A local paper ran a piece, "Festival Flop Leaves Influencer in Hot Water," and I clipped it for the hell of it, a memento of the night I'd flipped the script. The documentary aired a month later, pulling decent viewings and a check that made me smirk. Karen's cash grab had funded my win. Friends dropped by, joking about the Battle of the Pasture, and I let myself laugh, the tension of that night finally easing. My land wasn't just a plot anymore. It was a story, one where I'd outsmarted a con and come out ahead. Karen, last I heard, was drowning in court dates, her smug grin a memory. She'd underestimated me, and it'd cost her everything. The field still bore scars, patches of bare dirt, a bent gate, but they'd fade. I'd started that night furious, ready to lose it all, but patience and a few phone calls had turned it around. As I stood there, the breeze carrying away the last echoes of her bass, I knew I'd won more than a fight. I'd reclaimed what was mine, and then some. The weeks after Corinne's collapse brought a strange calm to my life, the kind that settles in after a storm you didn't see coming but somehow weathered. My pasture was still a mess. Fences sagged like tired soldiers, and the ground was pocked with bare spots where festival feet had stomped the grass to death. But it was mine again, quiet and familiar. Cleanup crews hauled off the last of the trash, truckloads of beer cans and plastic cups disappearing with the ghosts of that night, while I patched what I could, hammering stakes and restringing wire under the wide sky. My horses shook off their jitters, grazing closer to the house again, their soft snorts a balm against the memory of blaring speakers. The documentary money hit my account, a tidy sum that covered repairs and left extra to stash away, and I couldn't help but grin at the irony. Corinne's scam had lined my pockets in the end. Online, her downfall kept churning. The internet wasn't done chewing her up. Fresh headlines popped up weekly. Influencer faces fraud charges. Corinne's Freedom Fest, the tax evasion edition, each one peeling back another layer of her unraveling life. Court filings leaked showing she tried to pin it on rogue staff, but the judge wasn't buying it. Her name was on every ticket stub and vendor deal. The IRS tightened the noose, slapping liens on what little she had left, and her lawyer's public statement, "We're exploring options," sounded more like a surrender than a defense. Her socials, once a shrine to her ego, went silent, then vanished, scrubbed clean as if she'd never existed. Friends who'd watched the saga unfold started calling me the strategist, half joking about my phone call takedown, and I let it slide. Better that than the guy who lost his land to a party. The documentary crew sent a follow-up email, hinting at a sequel if Corinne's legal mess deepened, and I shrugged. More cash wouldn't hurt, but I was ready to let the field rest. Neighbors swung by with coffee and gossip, piecing together how I'd turned her game into my victory, and their laughter echoed across the porch as we swapped theories about where she'd end up. The local paper ran a follow-up, "Pasture owner outsmarts festival fraud," and I tacked it next to the first clipping, a quiet trophy wall taking shape. Insurance squared away the last claims, new fencing, receding costs, and I walked the land daily, watching green creep back over the scars. The mechanical bull sign, somehow missed by the cleanup, leaned against a tree. I kept it as a relic, a rusty reminder of the absurdity. Online chatter shifted. Some painted me as a folk hero, others a petty avenger, but I didn't chase the spotlight. What mattered was the silence, the way the wind moved through without bass to drown it out. Corinne's name faded from the feeds, replaced by newer scandals, but whispers said she'd sold her condo to pay fines, her jumpsuit days swapped for courtroom scrambles. My win wasn't loud. It was in the steady rhythm of my boots on dirt, the horses nickering at dusk, the land breathing free again. That night had started with rage, her neon stage mocking me from my own window, but I'd played it smart, not loud, and come out whole. As I leaned on a freshly fixed gate, the sun dipping low, I knew the real victory wasn't the money or the memes. It was this, the quiet reclaiming of what was mine. Months later, my pasture had stitched itself back together, the scars of Corinne's invasion fatting into a story I'd tell over beers with a shrug and a grin. New grass sprouted thick and green, covering the bald patches where festival boots had danced, and the fences stood straight again, their fresh paint gleaming under the sun. My horses roamed freely now, no longer spooked by shadows or sudden noise, their calm a mirror to the peace that had settled over the land. The mechanical bull sign still leaned against that tree, a weathered keepsake I hadn't bothered to toss. It had become part of the place, a silent nod to the night I'd turned chaos into triumph. The documentary had aired to decent buzz, raking in views and a second check that I socked away for a rainy day. The crew even sent a framed still of me by the field, captioned "The Man Who Fought the Fest," which I hung above the clippings, a quiet brag wall in my den. Corinne's name had mostly vanished from the headlines, buried under fresher scandals, but snippets trickled through. She'd lost the condo, sold off her designer wardrobe to cover legal fees, and was facing a fraud trial that promised more than a slap on the wrist. The IRS had clawed back every cent they could find, and her old crew, the influencers who'd cheered her on, pretended they'd never met her, their feeds scrubbed of Freedom Fest hype. Her downfall was complete, a cautionary tale etched in pixels and court records, while I'd turned her mess into a win that kept paying off. Neighbors still brought it up half-awed, half-teasing. "You're the guy who took down a festival with a phone." And I'd laugh, letting the legend grow without feeding it. The land itself felt different now, not just a plot but a proving ground, its quiet a testament to what I'd held onto. Insurance had covered the last fixes, and with the documentary cash, I'd even upgraded the barn, a practical reward for outlasting her storm. Online, the memes had died down, but every so often, a clip of her meltdown resurfaced, keeping her humiliation alive while I stayed out of the fray. The crew floated a follow-up film, Karen's trial as a sequel, but I waved it off. I'd had my say, and the field didn't need more cameras. Standing there at dusk, the sky streaking orange over unbroken horizon, I thought back to that night. The bass shaking my glass, her smug smirk as she claimed my land. I'd been furious, ready to lose it all, but I'd played it cool, dialed the right numbers, and watched her house of cards fold. The victory wasn't in the noise, it was in this stillness, the way the wind carried no trace of her music, the way my boots sank into soil that was mine again. Karen had come for a quick buck and lost everything. I'd stood my ground and gained more than I'd imagined. The pasture wasn't just healed, it was stronger, a silent partner in a fight I hadn't asked for but won anyway. As the stars pricked through the dark, I leaned on that gate, the bull sign creaking in the breeze, and let the quiet sink in. She'd underestimated me, and it had cost her the game. I'd started that night with nothing but rage and a phone, but I'd ended it with justice, a paycheck, and a story that outlasts us both.